My name is Father Roger Landry. I'm a newspaper editor and pastor in the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts. Today we have the last in our 13-part series on the practical wisdom of the patron saint of Parish priest St. John Vianney for every Catholic. The last time we got together, we spoke about how St. John Vianney in his life tried to unite himself and his people to the holiness of God. At the very end, we focused on the fact that to become a saint, we must have a great recourse to all the saints. St. John Vianney would always say in his life that we had to have recourse fundamentally to the one whom God preserved free from all stain of original sin from the first moment of her life, Mary. He said, all the saints have had a great devotion to the Holy Virgin. No grace comes from heaven without passing through her hands. So it's unsurprising that St. John Vianney would have had a great devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And it's also unsurprising that he would spend his priesthood trying to pass on that contagious love to his people. What I'd like to do today is to focus on St. John Vianney's Marian piety and how we're called to imitate him in loving the mother whom Jesus himself loved, blessed, obeyed, kept free from all sin from the first moment of her life, assumed into heaven and crowned Queen of the Saints. After a focus on Mary and St. John Vianney, I'd like to speak a little bit about how the effects of that holy life Mary helped St. John Vianney to achieve flourished, especially in his working of miracles. And then finally, I'd like to conclude our series by mentioning how her prayers for him at each moment of his life and at the hour of his death, as he prayed so many times, pray for us now and at the hour of our death, helped him to cross the finish line of life well, so that he might be forever crowned with an imperishable wreath and dwell joyously with the saints at Jesus in Mary's eternal right side. So let's begin with St. John Vianney and Mary. He said, as a priest, that the Blessed Virgin was the object of my earliest affection, my earliest loves. I loved her even before I knew her, he said. His devotion began as an infant praying the rosary with his mother. When he was 4, Marie Vianney gave St. John Vianney a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary that became for the next several years his constant companion. He would place that statue on a chair in the corner of a room and kneel down and pray before it. He would make a small altar out of bales of hay in the barn and spend hours in meditation. When he was watching the sheep, he would place the wooden image in the niche of a tree and invite his companion to join him in honoring her with Marian hymns and prayers. Wherever he went, he took that statue with him because he wanted Mary to be beside him. He would say later in life, "Oh, how I loved that statue. Neither by day nor by night would I be parted from it. I would not have slept had I not had that statue beside me in my little bed." That childlike love for Mary only intensified over the decades. He meditated on the mysteries of the Rosary every day, entering into Mary's school to learn how to imitate Christ with love. He sanctified each hour by saying a Hail Mary as soon as the church bells rang to announce that hour. He prayed the Angelus 3 times a day, at 6 in the morning, at noon, and at 6 p.m. He would turn to Mary whenever he was in need. Once, when his older brother was supervising him raking in the fields, the brother expected the young John Mary to keep up with all the other much bigger boys in their workload. The first day, St. John Vianney broke down in tears at his incapacity to meet the higher expectations. The next day, he tried to do it another way. He sought Mary's help to help him to keep up. And he decided to place the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary ahead of him and rake as fast as he could to catch up to her. He did that nonstop for the entire day, kept up with all the bigger boys, and finished the day amazed and grateful to Mary that he wasn't fatigued in the least. As a priest, his love, devotion, and reliance on Mary only magnified. One of the first things he did after arriving in Ars was to erect an altar in the church specifically dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. Every Saturday for the next 41 years, he celebrated a votive Mass to her on that altar, asking her intercession for his vocation and for the holiness of all his people. He led a pilgrimage of his whole parish on foot to Notre Dame de Fourvière, a Marian sanctuary about 30 miles away in Lyon, to help them learn how to follow Mary's faith footstep by footstep along the pilgrimage of life. When he remade the entrance of his church, he put a statue of Mary on top of the pediment above the front door and hung around her neck a red heart-shaped box in which he put the names of all his parishioners, as a tangible reminder of how tenderly Mary keeps each one of us in her Immaculate Heart. He encouraged every family in the village to erect a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary before their house, to remind them each day to imitate St. John and the Blessed Virgin Mary in taking her into their home every time they were re-entering that home. For the inside of their houses, he gave every family a colored picture of the Mother of God as a visible reminder of the consecration of the entire parish to her Immaculate Heart that he led them to make in 1836. He encouraged all the mothers in his parish, when they saw that blessed image in their homes each morning, to reconsecrate to Mary all their children. He consecrated himself to her and encouraged others to do the same, saying, "Consecrate yourself to Mary. Pray to her as a good mother. Honor her above all in her Immaculate Conception." This consecration is something that I encourage everyone to do. Pope John Paul II used to continually each morning pray his consecration to Mary, which is called Totus tuus ego sum, et tota mea tua sunt, accipio te in mea omnia, prebe me cor tuum, O Maria. That consecration prayer from the formula of Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort. I am all yours, Mary, and all I have is yours. I take you into the totality of my being. Give me your heart, O Mary. Made St. John Vianney a saint, made John Paul II holy, and will do the same for us. In his extraordinary ministry of conversion, Mary was St. John Vianney's constant intercessor and accomplice. He repeated often that he sought to put into practice the insight of the great St. Bernard, who attested that he had obtained more conversions by a single Hail Mary than by all his sermons combined. The parishioners of ours routinely witnessed their pastor begging Mary's help for the conversion of sinners. Once, when a man was resisting coming into the church for confession, the courier of ours was overheard praying, "Mary, don't leave me for a minute. Be always at my side, O Mary. Chase away the demon who has enslaved this person under his empire, who is tempting him and trying to prevent his making a good confession." When others came asking him to pray for the conversion of a loved one, he always readily said that he would, but he likewise recommended that they have recourse to praying to the Blessed Virgin Mary and to make a novena to her for this very purpose. He tried to help everyone relate to Mary as a mother full of merciful love. He said, "The heart of this good mother is only love and mercy," he said. "She desires so much to help us, but above all does so when we want to return to the good God. Therefore, we should address her with great confidence, sure that even though we're miserable, she will obtain for us the grace of our conversion." And to back up this point, he used a characteristically unforgettable image. He says, "The more we're sinners, the more Mary has tenderness and compassion for us. The child who has cost his mother the most tears is always the one dearest to her heart," he said. "Does not a mother always choose to run to the weakest and most exposed of her kids? A doctor in a hospital, doesn't he always pay most attention to the one who's sickest? That's what Mary does for the greatest sinners among us." He encouraged us to follow his example and to have recourse to Mary whenever we're under trial and temptation. He said, "If you invoke Mary when you're tempted, this mother who is so full of tenderness will come immediately to your aid, because she loves us more than the greatest and most loving mother loves a child. She's better than the best of mothers." He encouraged all his parishioners to develop a deep filial bond with her by saying a Hail Mary at the beginning of each hour, praying the Rosary and the Angelus each day just as he did, and turning to her with confidence whenever in need. He confessed once that the secret of all his intercessory prayer was to make it through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Listen to what he said about prayer through Mary. He said, "One prayer very pleasing to God is to ask the Holy Virgin to offer to the Eternal Father his divine Son, all full of blood, all lacerated for the conversion of sinners. It's the best prayer one can make. My children, listen well. Every time I've obtained a grace, I've asked for it in this way, and I've never gone without." Full of love and reverence, he preached about Mary as the masterpiece of God's hands and the depository of all his graces. When Pope Pius IX solemnly declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception in 1854, 5 years before St. John Vianney's death, the priest's joy couldn't be contained. Despite multiple infirmities, he rang the church bells himself that day so long and so loudly that people from the neighboring villages came thinking that there was a fire, because the bells would be rung to call other people with water when something important was burning down. He sang the solemn Mass in a beautiful new vestment and walked in the celebratory procession even though he was very ill. To those who thought in his condition he was going overboard, he gave his own version of the traditional Catholic aphorism, De Maria Nunquam Satis, of Mary no one can say enough. He said, "In order to give something to the Holy Virgin, I would sell myself if I could." He treasured his relationship with his spiritual mother as the greatest gift he had ever received after the Eucharist. Jesus Christ, he said, after having given us everything he could, wanted to make us heirs of what was most precious to him, his Holy Mother. And he never took that gift for granted. Mary helped him not only to become a faithful priest after the heart of her Son, but a tireless collaborator in bringing literally hundreds of thousands to know, love, and follow the blessed fruit of her womb. After the break, we'll talk about how Mary helped St. John Vianney in his prayer to be a great means of God's miraculous love to his people, as well as how Mary helped him to cross the finish line of life as a saint just like her. When we talk about St. John Vianney as a saint, many people ask whether he worked miracles here on earth, as many of the saints have, and the answer to that question is yes, he did. He was an instrument that God used over and over again to be able to bring his healing power to people here on earth. St. John Vianney often tried to deflect the credit for it to others, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to his famous friend, St. Philomena, but there were times where he couldn't duck it. He once said to his sister that God can work miracles at all times, and that God would work miracles today just like he did in the days of old if it weren't that faith was wanting. Well, even though faith is wanting in many of us, it wasn't wanting in the life of the Choreovars, which is one of the reasons why God responded to a lot of his pleas. The greatest miracles of all that occurred in ours, he insisted always, were the miracles of conversion. He said that the conversion of someone from a state of mortal sin to grace is a greater miracle than what the Lord did to raise Lazarus from the dead. He said the body is so little in comparison to the sacrament that heals the wounds of our soul. These were the types of miracles for which the patron saint of priests implored God the most. And having witnessed so many of them as a confessor, it's somewhat predictable that he trusted totally in the Lord's ability to work the lesser miracles of the body. In the investigation for the cause of canonization of St. John Vianney, which began just 6 years after he died, 30 documented physical cures were presented, but these were just a small sample of what had occurred in ours. The mayor of ours, after much commotion was made after the healing of a blind girl, straightforwardly replied to his astonished visitors, "Oh, the Holy Curé performs many such miracles." These wondrous cures only continued after the priest returned to the Father's house, which the process of canonization also noted. As with Jesus' miracles in the Gospel, those worked through St. John Vianney were of all types, young and old, the deaf, the blind, the mute, partially or totally paralyzed, those afflicted with tuberculosis or visible tumors, and maladies affecting almost every part of the body. He also worked prodigies like the multiplication of loaves and fish, multiplying corn in an attic once when the orphanage had totally run out of all food to eat. Normally, St. John Vianney tried to deflect the agency for the miracles the Lord worked for him. His greatest thaumaturgical co-conspirator was St. Philomena. When he was just a 16-year-old boy, the grave of this young female martyr was discovered in the catacombs of St. Priscilla in Rome. Since she had died for the faith when she was just 15, the pious future priest developed a natural devotion to this heroic young contemporary, about whom little was known beyond her name and her death. When Father Vianney received a relic of hers after his ordination, he resolved to spread devotion to her. And during the renovations of the church and ours, he built an altar to her and installed her relics within it. It was from that altar that her fame grew by leaps and bounds. To those who came to the Quarry of Ars asking for cures, he replied, "I don't work miracles. I'm just a poor ignorant man who was once a tender of sheep. Address yourselves to Saint Philomena. I have never asked anything through her without being answered." He affectionately called her his dear little saint, consul, representative, intermediary, and agent with God. It was clear that St. John Vianney and St. Philomena had a deep, personal, supernatural friendship. He once sent a girl who hadn't been able to speak in 2 years to go and pray at St. Philomena's altar with these words, "Tell her that if she's not willing to restore your voice to you, she should give you her own voice." And she was cured by the end of the prayer. To a woman paralyzed on her left side, he instructed, "Go and talk about all this to St. Philomena and tell her, 'Restore my arm to me and give me your own.'" And she was healed instantaneously. After many such miracles, however, people started to ascribe them, it seems correctly, not just to St. Philomena, but to the faithful priest who was invoking her alongside of them. This was too much for the holy curé to handle. He told his friends that he had to strike a deal with his saintly friend. He would send them to her altar to begin a novena, but that she would ask God to grant the miracle on the 9th day after they had returned home from Ars. Father Vianney told his parochial vicar, "I've asked the saint to cure souls here to her heart's content in the confessional, but to heal bodies elsewhere." He complained once when she failed to hear him that the sick people were cured there in Ars, and he got a little angry that she had broken her end of the deal. Once when a crippled child was cured instantly at her altar, he said to a friend later that she had broken her covenant with him, that she should have cured that child somewhere else. Try as he did, though, to pass the credit for the working of miracles to St. Philomena, there were several that he worked that could not be so delegated. A famous and funny example happened when a woman brought a child with a huge tumor under her eye. The priest suggested she take the child to St. Philomena's altar. She said that she would, but asked first for his blessing. And as he raised his arm, the mother took his hand and touched it to the tumor on her child's face, which immediately disappeared. He said later that day to his parochial vicar, "A fine trick was played on me today. I felt so ashamed that had I seen a hole anywhere, I should have tried to hide in it." He was humble. He didn't want the credit coming to him, but only to God and to the saints. Several cures also happened immediately in the confessional, especially those who were mute and otherwise wouldn't have been able to confess. Since miracles always require faith and morals flow from faith, St. John Vianney demanded this type of living faith from those who came with requests for miracles. To a young epileptic from Marseille who was not living chastely, he said, "This is not the way to behave for one who desires to be cured." To a young girl with a paralyzed short leg, he told her that her leg would be cured to the extent that she became truly respectful of her mother. Over the course of the next 3 months, she worked hard on it, and her leg inexplicably began to grow and would acquire complete neuromuscular control. Often the saint tried to help people see that a physical cure might not be spiritually good for them. As we've discussed earlier, St. John Vianney viewed the cross as a caress, not a curse, and believed that the greatest cross was to have no cross. He therefore said to a sick man, "Oh, mon ami, oh, my friend, I don't know whether to pray for your cure or not. One should not take the cross from shoulders that are so well able to bear it." These are words for us to ponder. As we near the conclusion of the series, it would be wise for us not only to look to St. John Vianney as a model disciple and pastor, but also as a powerful intercessor, even for otherwise hopeless physical cures. The same Lord who worked miracles in Palestine 2,000 years ago and in France 150 plus years ago, through the Quarry of Ars intercession, is still all-powerful and does still work them in response to faith. As a reminder of that faith, St. John Vianney would undoubtedly want me to point all of you to the confessional, where the omnipotent Lord works his greatest miracles every day. The last theme that we'll discuss in this series is the death and the eternal life of St. John Vianney. St. Paul once prayed in his spiritual testament to St. Timothy as he approached the end of his life, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." As St. John Vianney finished the urgent journey of his own Christian life, these words could likewise have been his earthly valedictory. His faith moved him to continue fighting heroically for soul with tremendous urgency and stamina until his last breath. Despite his growing frailty and the request of so many of his friends to slow down, the love of God and others continued to push him to give all that he had left. The last year of his life was his busiest, as ours was inundated with the largest crowds ever. More than 100,000 pilgrims came to that tiny little village in 1858, and they did not allow the pastor any respite. Even though missionary priests were now available in the church to hear the confessions of those who might be in a hurry, the vast majority of pilgrims chose to wait 6 days for 5 minutes with Father Vianney. The future patron saint of priests didn't mind the work. He said to those who were advising him to slow down that if a priest were to die in consequence of hard work and sufferings for the glory of God and the salvation of soul, it wouldn't be a bad thing. To those who noted the obvious, that 4 decades of barely any sleep had taken a toll on him, he said, "We shall rest in the next world." Even though his growing weakness made it harder for him to maintain his sprint toward the finish line, his desire for others kept him going. One day when his aches and pains couldn't be hidden any longer, he candidly admitted, "This morning I would have liked to have stayed in bed, but I didn't hesitate to get up because the salvation of souls is so important." With humility and a sense of humor, he was aware that even he was pushing himself to the limit. "The sinners will end up by killing the poor sinner," he joked to Father Tocanier, who was one of his assistants. One morning he collapsed 4 times just on the short walk to the church. Some nights he would return to the rectory after a hard day's work, barely able to get his fatigued frame into a chair. He would exclaim, "This is laughable," and he would add with an honest smile, "I can do no more." On several occasions he gave evidence that he had received a divine premonition about when he would die. After the Easter season, he met all those who had made their Easter duties and lamented, referring to 7 members of the village of 650 who hadn't confessed and received the Holy Communion yet, that there are still some sinners in the parish. It's necessary for me to go so that another may convert them. They rightly took this as a farewell. To a benefactor who gave him something to be used for the Corpus Christi procession, he thanked him and said, "I won't use it twice." To a penitent who had come to see him every year, but who because of her infirmity told him she would probably never see him again, he replied, "Yes, my child, but we shall meet again in 3 weeks' time." She had no idea what he was talking about, but 3 weeks later both of them had died and were in the presence of the Lord. To another penitent he confided, "I have only a few days to live," and he asked her to run some errands for him and told her that she would return in time for his funeral. On July 29th, he arose at 1 in the morning to head to the confessional, but when he got there, he couldn't breathe because of a burning fever. He insisted on trying to preach the catechism at 11 a.m., but like Pope John Paul II at the Easter Angelus the Sunday before he died, no one could hear him, and everybody could see that the end was near. That night, as he was shivering in his bed despite the stifling summer heat, he asked his housekeeper to send for his confessor, Father Louis Beau, the pastor of Gessin. Father Vianney had once preached how sweet it is to die if one has lived on the cross. And after his confession, he put that truth on display. Early in his life, he had repeatedly stated that he wanted to have at least 2 years in a monastery before he died to weep over his poor life and prepare himself for death. That wish was never granted, but his cruciform existence until the end gave him a chance to make prayer and reparations with his whole body and soul. Even on his deathbed, he told the religious who were keeping vigil not to bother swatting away the flies that were attracted to his sweaty face. "Mortified to the end," he said, "leave me with my poor flies. The only vexatious thing is sin." On August 2nd, he asked Father Beau to bring him viaticum, and 2 days later he passed into God's glory, which is where he is now awaiting us, and we ask praying for us so that we will learn what he sought to teach us during these 13 episodes, put them into practice, and come one day to experience eternal glory alongside. Thank you for joining us for this series. St. John Vianney, pray for us all.